Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the United States. We're very happy that you're with us today for our May GP office hours. Our speaker today is our CEO and President, Brian Wilton, and he provides leadership and strategic direction to our entire organization. Prior to joining LBMC Technology Solutions, Brian served as the president of Interdyne BMI. You probably remember them. They were a national Microsoft Dynamics Gold partner that served both enterprise and mid-market customers across the US. In 2015, Interdyne BMI was acquired by Columbus. For the past 25 years, Brian has been a speaker for Microsoft Corporation, the Kansas City Society of CPAs, the Texas Society of CPAs, and the Michigan Association of CPAs. And if you're going to Community Summit, Brian will be a speaker there as well. Brian spent 5 years on staff of Park University in Parkville, Missouri, providing instruction in tax, accounting, and technology coursework. Brian holds CPA licenses in Texas, Michigan, Missouri, and Kansas, and holds the Certified Information Technology Professional, which is issued by the American Institute of CPAs. In addition, Brian is a Microsoft Certified Professional and a Microsoft Business Solutions Specialist. Brian, thank you for being here this afternoon.
All right, Dawn, thank you. And I've got to work to shorten that bio up a little. so, uh, but I appreciate that. So, and welcome everyone to our Purging Data session for Dynamics GP. So we will get started here in just a slide or two, but I wanted to draw your attention to the next 3 upcoming webinars that we have. And as you know, we do these GP office hours every month. And so our June presentation will be by Jason Barnes, and that is titled Unlocking the Power of Microsoft Power Pages with Dynamics GP. Jason will also be speaking at a Community Summit this fall as well around the Power Platform and Power Pages. And so that will be an interesting one for June. And then in July, we're doing one around inventory, which we have done in the past, but it's always popular. So we call it GP inventory. You can be in control. And then in August, we have another kind of not exclusively GP session called Microsoft Copilot Studio and the Future of Accounting Systems. Copilot, you've all heard about AI, so ChatGPT, Copilot, Google's Gemini, and so are the 3 big ones. But Copilot is the Microsoft product. Copilot Studio is actually how to create your own artificial intelligence using Copilot without being a programmer or a pilot. So, and then if you are planning to join us at Dynamics Community Summit in October, so the 19th through the 23rd in wonderful Orlando, Florida. It's at the Gaylord Palms. And if you've been before, you know that's a majestic property in Orlando. And so if you're going to join, please use our discount code there, LBMC Techno 10. So LBMC Technologies shortened to Techno. I had to confirm with Dawn yesterday or the day before, is that really the right discount code? But LBMC Techno 10 will get you a 10% discount off your registration. And then you'll be able to link to LBMC so that they know that you're getting the 10%. They'll give it to you, and we'll know that you're attending. And if you are, please plan to register and join us for dinner Sunday, October 19th at 7 p.m. at Moore inside of the Gaylord, so you don't have to leave. You'll feel like you've walked to another state in the Gaylord. It's very large, but it's a very good restaurant. And if you happen to be local at all and you're not attending Summit, please still register and attend the customer dinner on Sunday. Okay, with that, let's kick this off. And so we've got a lot of things to cover here in the next hour. And so we're going to talk about purging data. The main objective really is to help all of you understand the options, how you can purge, and the reasons you might want to choose to consider purging data from your Dynamics GP solution. And the bottom one down there, if you're like me, kind of have an accounting background, usually the word purge, because let's face it, that means delete. Usually that kind of gives us chills, kind of down our spine type thing. And so we'll kind of talk through that anxiety here as we go through. So here's our agenda. We're really going to kind of talk about these four things: archiving or deleting data, and answer the question why you should consider it. The question that we won't answer is why that first arrow is a different color than the others. So can't answer that one. And then we'll talk about options to archive, and then actually spend the bulk of the time in how we're actually purging data module by module throughout Dynamics GP. And then lastly, finish up with deleting master record data. Of course, master records are your accounts, your vendors, your customers, inventory items, as well as it could be employees. I don't talk specifically about that, but they all kind of follow the same logic, if you will, on removing some of that master data if you don't need it. Okay, and so the first question is why consider archiving or deleting data? Well, performance is a big one. And so if you notice that some of your reports, especially inventory or sales type reports that can have to comb through a lot of data, sometimes a lot of years worth of data, performance is a good reason to consider removing some of that data. Maybe you see smart lists start to go a little slower over time. And again, smart list is, it has to comb through a lot of data to find all those things that you want. And the more restrictions you put on a smart list, then the longer it takes to comb through the data and start parsing those things out to give you your results. You might have a company policy that just says, we're only going to keep 5 years worth of data or 7 years worth of data or 10 years worth of data. And so sometimes companies just mandate how much data they really want to have on hand. And you can eliminate data clutter. And so, you might have some stuff in there when you moved from DAC Easy in 1987. You might not need some of those records you migrated over to actually get onto Dynamics GP, or what would have been called Great Plains in 1987. If you have customers and vendors that you no longer do business with, and you haven't for a long period of time, you may decide that you probably don't need all of that history in there after a while. And then faster upgrades and backups. Well, backups especially, because backups you're doing at least once a day, right? And so, if you have data in there from 40 years ago, well, you're backing that up every night. And I got a feeling that that data in the last, if you go back 10 years, back 40, that data is probably not changing. And yet you're having to back that up and take time and in space to do that. Upgrades may or may not be a valid point. Obviously, if you have that data, all that history in your production company, you're upgrading that every time that you put a new version on, which is probably annually now. Well, if you push that into an archive company, you're still upgrading it, but that you can upgrade and back up one time, and that data is not changing. And so you ultimately save time if you don't have all of that long-term history kind of at your fingertips. And then limiting risk. And so this is a bigger one nowadays, where some companies don't want things to be discoverable during subpoena. And so, if you don't have the data, you don't have the data. And so depending on your industry or your business, you may need to keep data, you may not want to keep data. And so that's always one for consideration. Okay, so archiving options. Well, there's really three. The ISV on the left, you all probably know Professional Advantage. You've heard their name. They've been around for I don't want to say forever, but close. And so they make a product, actually the only product that is dexterity based, meaning that it's off the menus inside of your GP system, and that's Company Data Archive. And so that's a nifty little tool that allows you at random, most people do it annually, but at random, to actually take data from your production company and push that into an archive company. So you can have one archive company, and then every year as part of your closing process, you can say, okay, if we want to keep 5 years in our live company, and so when we close out the end of 2025, we want to push, the oldest year into the archive company and then purge it or delete it from the live company so that we only have kind of that 5 year window in the live company, but all of our history is in the archive company. So you only need one archive company. And Professional Advantage was good enough over time to rewrite a lot of the inquiry windows so that you can pull in the data from the archive database and the data from your current company database. And so that makes it super easy to get to that data without logging out of your production company and into the archive company and running a smart list or a query or just looking at an inquiry window. You don't have to actually do that process. You can do that from the live company for the most part. The middle column there is to use a data warehouse. So this is a much more generic solution. And so, the beauty of a data warehouse is you could dump old GP data in there, and then you could dump a whole bunch of other stuff in there that doesn't have anything to do with your Dynamics GP system, and then query or write reports or queries against the data warehouse for any of that data, not just GP, but anything that's out there. So it's a much broader, more robust solution, but it's a little unstructured on its own. And so, like Azure Data Lake is kind of the Microsoft flavor. Amazon has their own flavor of the data warehouse. But if you were to use Azure Data Lake, it's a big unstructured database. So think of a large filing cabinet. Well, if you dump stuff in there, you kind of have to know where it is and what it was called and so forth. Where, like, if you use a structured data warehouse, and Solver makes one of those. So if you have their reporting, budgeting, and planning product, like a lot of our clients do, that comes with a data warehouse. And if you move data from your Dynamics GP system into a structured data warehouse, then it retains the structure that it had in Dynamics GP. And so the data looks like it did in your GP system. And all the table names, all the fields and so forth all look the same as they did from the GP side. So that makes it a little easier to query that data out because it's the same in the data warehouse as it was in GP. And then E1, y'all know E1, probably all have at least one of their products. And so E1 has a product called PopDoc, and that actually sits on top of a structured data warehouse. And so Solver and E1 are really good solutions to maintain that structure that GP has today, but you're doing that from a data warehouse. And so that's an option. And then the far right column, the least attractive, but it kind of, quote, does work. And if you really can't do anything else for some reason, you can just make a backup copy of your live company and restore it as a archive company, as a history company. You can do that, but of course it's static. And if 3, 4, 5 years go by and you want to clean up data again, well, then you have to make another backup company. That's maybe history company number 2. And then another few years, you'll end up history company number 3 and so forth. And so that's not very elegant because then you have to remember kind of where that data was if you need to log into those historical companies and extract something or run a report or a query or something. And so over time, that's really challenging to maintain. And so, it kind of technically does work. It's free. But there's a price to pay when you go to retrieve that data. Now, yes, you could run reports, you could query against, with a lot of tools nowadays. You could query all of those databases at once and find the data you're looking for, but someone has to build that stuff. And so there's nothing kind of out of the box, if you will, if you're going the copy of your company and making that your historical company route. And so anyway, those are kind of the options we have. But before you do any archiving, any purging of any data, you want to do one and only one thing. If you do nothing else, and that is you have to back everything up. So Results can be unpredictable, and sometimes you could be removing something that you don't want to remove, but it's a really, really, really strong suggestion is you have to have a backup. The other thing that goes along with that that I think is really important is try this in your test database first. And if you don't have a test database, you can create one quickly from your live company, but you should always do this in a test database just to make sure the results are what you think they're going to be. And so there's nothing worse than that feeling when you delete something and it's permanently deleted, and you find out, oh, I didn't really want to go quite that far. I wanted to stop it, last year or 5 years ago and not do it last year. Or I didn't want to delete yesterday's business. So at that point, you're probably restoring back up. So anyway, so two, I think, kind of strong suggestions there that everyone should heed. So what can you purge out of Dynamics GP? Well, just about anything. So you can delete transaction history, you can delete distributions, those are the debits and the credits, those things that would be on the distribution button on a variety of windows when you're entering transactions. You can delete period, so period history generally meaning customers, vendors, and things like that, so where their period buckets are being accumulated. Journal history, those are the posting journals, and so if you ever go to reprint posting journals, that history is what's being used to recreate those posting journals. And so we'll talk as we get into the modules. If you delete journal history and then go back in a few weeks and say, oh, let me reprint that sales posting journal. Oh, guess what? It's not there. Well, because you deleted it. And so that's what the journal history is. Sales history is generally sales order processing, so SOP, if you will. Invoice history is the invoicing module, different than the sales order processing module. You can delete that history. And then lastly, again, is the master files. As I mentioned, those are our chart of accounts, our vendors, customers, inventory items, and kind of those card areas that you work. So anything under cards are generally master files. So as we get into the modules now, so the financial is the first area, and I put the path here. So these are generally all tools, utilities, and then whatever the module is. So tools, utilities, financial here, and then the menu option is called remove history. And you see the window there with the green bar around it is the window you're presented with. Transaction history can be done by period or by date. That's what I've highlighted in green there. And so account history clears the entire year, so including the beginning balance. So if you look at the account inquiry windows for any year in the system, that's the window that I'm talking about. The transactions will be cleared for the entire year, including the beginning balance. And so now the system's not going to let you take something out that allows you to go out of balance in the general ledger. So it's not going to let you take out just a little bit of the data. It's going to, in areas that it could throw you out of balance, it's going to make you take out the appropriate periods for the most part. And then if you click on the ranges button down there in the bottom right, the window on the right opens. So here, if you wanted to take out one of the segments in your chart, maybe you're not using it anymore, you opened a store in Austin, Texas, 15 years ago, and closed it 10 years ago, you probably don't need that activity anymore. And so the transactions that were coded to location 200, maybe that's my Austin store in this example, I could take those transactions out of the system. There is an option on this utilities menu that you might see and probably have never used, but once in a while get questions on, what does this consolidate periods mean? And so that is an option on the tools, utility, financial. Well, back in the 80s when disk space, in early 90s when disk space was really expensive, so it was precious, Great Plains software, they figured out how to create a utility that would consolidate all of the numbers in a period for an account up into one number. So for example, if you had accounts payable and you had 10,000 transactions, for the year in that AP account, the consolidate period would roll all those transactions up into one single number, one debit, probably a credit if it's AP, and then that would be the balance for the year. And so you lose the detailed debits and credits, and you just get a consolidated number. And so if you run a trial balance, even if you run a detailed trial balance, the detail is that one number if you've consolidated periods. And so again, that was done when disk space was really expensive and at a premium, and we had 10 megabyte drives and 20 megabyte drives. None of that is the case anymore. Disk space is extremely expensive. Every laptop has a half a gig or more in it, and that's a fraction of the cost is what a 10 gig or 20 gig drive used to be. So my recommendation is you ignore that menu item. You don't ever run that. If you have an accounting background, again, this could be one of those things that is just like, there's no reason to do it. And so it is out there. I personally don't know anyone that's ever done it, so I've never recommended it. I think it's not needed anymore because we have plenty of room now. So okay, so bank history, this was added a few versions back. And so we have the ability to remove things from the bank reconciliation area. This does not remove the general ledger. It does not remove any sub ledger, but it's those things that would show up on the checkbook register when you go into reconcile, or you go into the checkbook register reports. So anything that's been reconciled, so that's the first three there, deposits, transactions, or transfers up through a date, can be removed. Do you need to know if a transaction was reconciled, in 1992? Do you need that at your fingertips? I would say you probably don't. And so, and obviously if a transaction was voided, you probably don't need to know about that. If it's 25 years old or 10 years old or whatever your company rationale is for keeping history. And so this was never there until a few versions back. And so we had all this data in the bank rec when, generally didn't bother us until we went to look at a checkbook register or run a report. That data got rather large. And so a lot of times people had, sometimes tens of thousands of transactions in a year, sometimes hundreds of thousands of transactions in a year that were all just sitting out there. So anyway, that is how you can remove history from the banking system. But again, it has nothing to do with the general ledger. It's only those things that show up in the checkbook reports or the bank rec windows. Okay, so moving on to sales. Again, tools, utilities, sales. And then there are a variety of options here. You'll see the menu actually on the right side, the actual menu. And so we can also remove transactions. We can do distributions at the same time. So again, anything that's in the distribution window, think debits and credits, we can do those at the same time, or we can do those separately. I don't know why you would not do those together. I don't know why you would do distributions only or remove transactions and leave distribution. Although you might, but they can be done together or separate. And then you can remove the sales period history, which is the kind of the accounting periods, the monthly periods that have been accumulated, the journal history, sales order processing history, and then invoicing if you use the invoicing module and not sales order processing, which most people do not, but it is still out there. So what's this look like? Well, if you remove the transaction history and or distributions, again, you can do those from one window. The transactions generally are set to whatever range you provide. You'll see on the right side of the screen, the drop down there is you can do it by customer, by document number, by document type. So, credits, invoices, other adjustments, returns, whatever it might be. Audit trail code, if you just were looking to remove a specific transaction, maybe just got all messed up, and you just didn't want it in there, you could do that. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't use audit trail code, but posting date, that's kind of a popular one. So that allows you to go in and say, okay, from 1997 to 2007, just get rid of that stuff. That's a good way to do that, is by date. You'll see down at the bottom there, you can check transactions and or distributions. You can also print a report. So you don't have to do the remove to get the report. So if you uncheck, in mine here, I have transactions checked. If I uncheck that and leave distributions unchecked, I can just run the report and GP will tell me what it's going to remove if I actually then come back and check transactions and or distributions. Those reports are generally best sent to the screen. So, because they can be large, I wouldn't necessarily print that personally, but you could. And so the one caveat here in this, we're talking about receivables here, not sales order processing, receivables. And so the transactions that might be in a range. So if you set the posting date to, January of 2000, a transaction that was initiated in that month, you would think would get deleted. However, it does not, because it can't be a stranded transaction. And what I have up at the top kind of highlighted there in yellow is if you're asking for something to be purged, but the apply record, in other words, the payment or credit memo or both, if the apply record is attached in a different period, then it can't remove the invoice from January of 2000 if the payment or the credit was March of 2000, because they're attached to that invoice. And so sometimes people will try to remove a bunch of stuff and then they ask us, oh, I asked for it to remove and the stuff's still out here. Well, more times than not, it's because the payment record is not in the same period that you asked to be removed as the invoice. Now, if you're doing it for a year, you'll see less of that, but invoices that went out in December probably they weren't paid in December, unless you have really good customers. They were probably paid in January, February of the next year. And so you have to kind of make sure that you understand why some of those things are not going away when you think they should. Okay, so period history. Again, you'll see the ranges at the top screen on the right there. A couple of things to call out here. So we're talking about receivables. So we're talking about customers. The yearly summary window. So that's the window down at the bottom left. If you have customers in your system, that will look familiar. The yearly summary window does not get removed when you remove the period. That data is kept in another table, and that actually stays there forever. And it, the year to date gets moved into the life to date when you close the sales year. Last year then becomes, what's in this year's column. And so anyway, that's probably the better way to say it. So the life to date, it's actually included there already. So last year moves, or this year moves to last year. The life to date should be updated real time. So that data, that window is not going to zero out. The one on the right, which is the customer period summary, that actually gets removed. So if you do the remove period history, that's the window you're taking that data from. And so if you want to keep that data, do not remove the period history. If you're okay not having it, then you can get rid of it with the period history removal. So, but the yearly summary doesn't ever go away. If you remove the journal history, again, we're talking about posting journals. That affects the historical age trial balance for receivables, for sales. And so, if you decide that's okay, you don't need to ever run the historical age. And again, think we're talking, 10 years ago, maybe longer, probably okay to not have to recreate that historical age trial balance. But this one you generally do after you've done the transactions and distributions and so forth. Technically doesn't matter, but usually it's a good idea to kind of do these in order. And of course, you can't reprint the posting journals if you remove the journal history. So goes without saying, but sometimes not. If you have sales order processing, you use the SOP module. So that has its own utilities. So that's removing sales history. The rest of it that we've talked about is removing the receivables module history. This is actually the subledger, so SOP. And again, you can remove transactions, distributions. You can remove attachments. So if you think about the document attachment feature that's in sales order processing, it'll allow you to remove those attachments and then deposit. So if you take a deposit from a customer or run a card on an order and that shows up as a deposit, then that could be removed. And then of course, also the posting journals. Same thing here is you can print a report. Again, probably to the screen is best, but you could run a report to see what it's going to do before you actually do it. And so let's see. And then invoicing. So this is not to be confused with invoices that are done in sales order processing. This is the invoicing module only. So if you're not using sales order processing and just using invoicing, most people don't, but there are some, then you have the same options here to remove that history from the invoicing module. But this module doesn't have document attached, and so that's why that one's not there. It only has transactions, distributions, and then the posting journals. And so it doesn't have the capabilities of sales order processing. And so there's no data out there to remove except the transactions and the distributions. Remember, in invoicing, if you've been around the system, invoicing doesn't allow you to have the line item details and capabilities like you do in SOP or sales order processing. All right, and then kind of the last thing in sales is the sales tax. And so this is a utility at the company level. So if you run sales tax in GP, you know that those reports are stored at the company level, not in the sales module. And so at the company level, we can remove the tax history and lots of ranges here: tax detail, the tax type, the description, taxes for certain customers or vendors if you're using kind of more of the use tax functionality, document date, and posting date. So lots and lots of options there to be able to extract and remove sales tax. And again, we're not talking about, last year or 2 years ago. We're probably talking about 5 to 7 or greater transactions that most people would be removing. And so you can print the report here. It's not a button. It's a bullet under the very top there under options. So you can remove and print the report. You can just remove without the report. Or the third one is print the tax history removal report, but you're not removing anything. You're just looking at what you're going to remove. And so this one was added later, different development team. And so they didn't use the checkbox. They used the bullet under the options there, but same idea. All right, so then as we move into purchasing, we have the same scenario. So we won't talk about all of them, but some of the differences. So in purchasing, unlike sales, you cannot go by a document's posting date. You can only go by a document date. And so the post date is not available here. It's the actual document date. So the actual invoice date that's keyed in. So if you think of keying in a vendor invoice into GP, it's that document date that you're putting in there. It's not the posting date. So, and that was kind of by design. I think they felt like at the time that posting date was generally less relevant in putting payables in than it was in putting sales in. And so, you might argue that, I might argue that, but nevertheless, that is really the only difference. Everything else works exactly the same in purchasing as it does in sales. You still have the ability to do distributions separate from transactions, or which is the screen on the left, that's just the distributions. The screen on the right, you'll see down at the bottom, just like in the sales removal, that we can check transactions and or distributions, or we can uncheck both. We can look at the report and see if what we're getting is what we're going to, what we want. So what we're going to lose is what we want to lose. We can do the report. As a practical matter, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a hard and fast rule, but most of the time, folks are not running these reports and storing them because they can be, fairly large, and depending on your company activity and the size of your system here. But most folks are not running and keeping these, but that's not to say that you can't or shouldn't. It's just most people do not. And so, if you're using the company data archive, then this is generally already pushed over into the archive company. Now you're removing it, so there shouldn't be any real reason to run those reports. If you're using a data warehouse or Solver E1's data warehouse, you've got access to that data, probably don't need the report. If you've made a backup of the company and you just parked it out there for use if you ever need it, well, again, you probably don't need the reports, because if you're running this for multiple years, you can have lots and lots of paper being eaten up. And so anyway, but up to you, but we don't see a lot of people kind of keeping hard copy of what they're removing. All right, so in purchasing and payables, if you're removing history, same process here is the vendor yearly summary. That's not removed. That doesn't go away, just like the sales yearly does not. The vendor period summary, just like in sales for customers, that does get removed. So I didn't put those windows in here because they're very similar. But if you are okay with the period summary window for vendors being emptied out, then that's fine. If you're not, then you should not remove the period summary. You can remove transactions and distributions without removing the period summaries. That's why that's a separate option, because that data is in a different spot in the database. And so, you don't have to clear it all if you don't want to. Okay, remove journal history, same rule. This affects the historical age trial balance. And so just like it does in sales, so this is posting journals when we say remove journal history. And obviously, if you remove it and then you go back to reprint a posting journal from 7 years ago, it's going to be blank. And so because you took the data out. And so now this one, you really do have to pay attention to, because if you remove the journal history and you decide to let this report generate, I personally would not. But if you do not print this to the screen, because every single batch of every single payables transaction in the range that you're removing. So if you're doing 5 years, how many batches are in that 5-year period of creating posting journals? I would say many to too many. And so every report is going to pop up. You're going to have to close it. So if you remember, you can only have one report open on the screen at a time. You go up and click the X, then the next one will load. You click that one off, the next one will load. You click the next one. You could have many, many, many thousands of posting journals that are getting sent to the screen if you click the box down there like I did to print the report. So if you need that report, that is one you have to send to the printer, and you're going to get a boatload of documents print out. And if you make the mistake of sending it to the screen, you are going to be there for a long time closing each one so the next one can pop up. And so most people learn that one the hard way by doing just that. And so anyway, that is probably the best tip I can give you on purchasing journal history removal. Okay, so the rest of purchasing is around purchase orders, requisitions, the PO receipts, and the related distributions and posting journals. And so that's in has its own window here. So also tools, utilities, purchasing, remove purchasing history. So if you use purchase requisitions in GP, not a lot of people do, but you can take those out by requisition number. If you have purchase orders in GP, now this will only take out historical, like closed POs. If a PO is open, obviously you don't want to remove it. It's not going to remove it. If a PO has 99% of the line items received, but there's still 1 out of 100 to come in or to be dealt with, it's not going to remove that because that's still open. And so it's only going to remove the history that that all this information is in. And so, and you do these one at a time. Um, and so Brad Smith has a question here. It seems the primary reason to removing data is to shrink the database. That is correct, Brad. The additional benefits are just so all that data is not in the windows when you go to look at the inquiry screens or run reports or smart lists or any of those types of things that have to look at the data. If you don't need that from 25 years ago, why have it in there? And the other thing is you're spending time, which could be money, to upgrade all that, once a year when that data is static and probably isn't going to be used ever again. And so those are probably the biggest benefits of not having a lot of old history out in the system. So we take purchase orders, the related receipts, and distributions. You'll see there that if I click receipt, I can also do distributions. I could do distributions separately. And then the journal information, again, is the posting journals for the receipts. Of course, POs don't create journal entries, but the receipts do. And so that you can kind of do all in one window here, kind of one thing at a time. Now, as we get over to inventory, there we go. Same general idea here, but obviously the inventory related items. And so I won't read those to you, but let me just make one comment. And so it works the same way. The transactions, you can also do distributions, the period history, the posting journal history, those are all exactly the same as sales and purchasing. The things that are kind of unique in inventory, if you use the bill of materials in inventory, this is not the manufacturing bill of materials. So we're not talking anything about manufacturing, but this is the assembly BOM just in the inventory module. Well, you might not need to know what things you assembled to sell a bouquet of flowers, again in 2005. And so if you don't need that bill of material assembly information, you can take that out. And same idea as transactions and the posting journals piece of that. And so you can remove the bill of materials out of the inventory module. Stock count history, if you do use inventory and you do use the stock count information, do you care what the stock count looked like December 31st of 1999? Probably not. But, do you care what it looked like, 3 years ago? Maybe not. Inventory is a moving target, and obviously you counted and reconciled with the GL and so forth for the end of the year if your year end is December. So a lot of people don't keep maybe more than 1 or 2 years back. I'm not saying that's what you should or have to do, but you can remove those old stock counts out there. And this one really is a space saver only. And so, I don't know how many items are in your inventory, but it could be, a lot. And so probably don't need all of that old stuff out there. If you use multi-bin in inventory, so if you have the multi-bin functionality turned on, the bullet points there can't remove a bin if it has transactions. Obviously, if there's a quantity in the bin, you can't remove it. If it's a default bin for a site, you can't remove it without setting something else to the default. So those are all logical. The top one there, right under remove bins, you can and should use this to unassign bins from sites. So if you say, hey, this bin in my Austin store is not, it's not there anymore, I'm not using that anymore, I don't want anyone to put product in there. Well, you can unassign that bin from that site if you're using the multiple bin feature in GP. And so this is just good cleanup as well. This doesn't take up much space because, you know, to remove it, you can't have anything in there. Well, the bin itself sitting out there is not a space hog at all. And so it's really more just to tidy up the system. You can remove the inventory transfer. So if you use the, again, if multi-bin is on and you use the bin-to-bin transfer feature in the system, you can remove that history. So if something was transferred from one bin to another in the Austin warehouse, you know, in 2021, well, you know, unless that item's still sitting out there in the warehouse, you probably don't care. And so a lot of people do clean this up. And that's, again, it's not a real big space hog here, but it just tidies us up the system quite a bit for you. You can do a preview here. You'll see the arrow going down to the preview button so you can see what it's going to do. That's the report on the right. And then if you're okay with everything, then you can just set the date back to what you had it and click the remove button, and that'll go through and clean all that information up for you. If you're using the in-transit functionality in the inventory system, this will also let you delete that transfer history. So it's a kind of the same exact idea as the bin-to-bin transfer. This is the location-to-location transfer. And if you're using that, you know, do you need to know what those transfers were, you know, many months or years ago? If you decide not, you can clean that history up as well. And again, not taking up a lot of room. It's really just more to tidy up the system. Here, this was a newer feature because the site-to-site transfer was newer in the system. And so when they wrote this, they put the print button on the ribbon, not as a button. And so don't be alarmed by that. Just a different development team, I'm sure. And so the print button to actually look at the report before you remove it is not down at the bottom by the remove button. It's up there on the ribbon, which you'll see highlighted. So, but you can do the same thing. You can look at it before you actually remove it. And then the last thing on inventory before we get into master records being removed is removing the serial or lot database. You can do that. You really have to think about that. If you're serial or lot tracking items and something needs to, maybe it's recalled, you know, if it was a food or medical product or something, or you're in manufacturing, might have requirement to keep that information for a long time. So I don't personally generally recommend you remove the serial lot database kind of ever. And so, but there is a utility to do it. You can decide if you're just using those things for internal purposes and the customer never knows or cares about what your serial number is on an item or a group of lot numbered items were, then that's probably okay to remove. But otherwise, that one you might want to keep up there. And then lastly, we'll talk just a couple of slides here on the master records. So GL accounts. You might have some accounts, again, brought in the 1980s here that you don't need anymore. And so there's a way to remove those. But obviously, if you've been around GP a while, you know that you can't have any transactions and take out the master record. So if a general ledger account has an account from 25 years ago or a balance from 25 years ago, you can't remove the account because what would the system do with that balance 25 years ago? It doesn't know where to put it, and it can't leave your general ledger out of balance. And so there cannot be any transactions of any sort in the account. Well, the very first thing we talked about was removing those balances, those transactions. So you do that first, then you can remove the account. Of course, you can do it one by one, you know, anytime. But there is a feature here, which you've all seen on the year-end closing window for the GL, for the finance system. You can remove accounts that are inactive. So if you have a bunch of accounts that you've taken the transactions out of already, mark them inactive. And then if you run the year-end close, as long as these rules are met that are on the left there, the 4 bullets, as long as those rules are okay, then the system will, as part of the year-end close, it'll actually take out those inactive accounts for you. So if you have 1 or 2 here or there, you can do them as one-offs. But if you're doing a cleanup as you get close to the end of your year, whenever that might be, if you kind of go through and clean those accounts up, you might have, hundreds of accounts. Maybe that whole division in Austin, Division 200, you want all those. There might be 100 accounts out there. Well, as long as the transactions are gone and they're not in allocations anywhere, there's no quick journals that use the account, and they don't have multi-currency attached, then when you close the year, if you check the box and they're marked inactive, then the system will remove them for you. And so anyway, it's a little bit of a shortcut there, if that makes sense. For vendors, temporary vendors, if you use those, a lot of people don't, but if you marked a vendor temporary, when you set them up, you can delete that temporary vendor with the transactions because they're temporary. And so that tells the system, hey, we're not tracking anything. I don't care about this. They're temporary. And that's the one and only time in the software that you can delete something with a transaction. Most people don't have temporary vendors or don't use them much. So the same rule is with vendors as customers and inventory items. You can delete, but you can't have any transactions attached to an item, a customer, or a vendor. Or what would the system do with that transaction that's out there? You got to get rid of the transaction first. So vendors, you can mass delete. That's helpful. By class, by salesperson. There's a few other things you can use to mass delete customers. Actually, salesperson's on the customer. But the vendors can be by class, different ranges. Customers, same thing, by class, by salesperson, as long as there's no transactions. And so the mass delete kind of helps you if you have groups that are logically grouped together. Sometimes we'll tell people create a class called delete and assign your vendor or your customer to those classes. Once you delete the transactions, put them in a class called delete, and then you can delete the class called delete. Inventory, there's no mass delete. It's one at a time. There's not a way to do more than one. Maybe there should be, but right now there's not. So those you have to do one-offs. Okay, so I think the last one is when is deleting not deleting? Most of you probably know if you have customers and have receivables that you run the paid transaction removal process probably at least once a month, and that removes things from open to history in the inquiry windows and takes a lot of that data off your aging reports. Well, that's not actually removing the data. And I tried for a decade to get Great Plains Software and then Microsoft to change that one word, paid transaction removal, to something else. Because people, when they're first using the software, they get a little antsy about, well, it's going to delete all my, well, it's not. It's moving them from open to history. And that's the one and only time that you're moving sales transactions from open to history. Purchasing, so payables, they move automatically when they're fully paid or applied. Sales don't. You have to come in and run the process. But it's like, could you not come up with another word except remove? So anything. But no, it's still out there and it lives. And so, but that's not really removing. Most of you know that. And then the same thing on purchase orders. And these are routines and they're not utilities. And that's another way for you to know that, oh, a utility is the removal. That's the purging. Routines are those things I would do routinely, time and time again. And so that's another way to have some comfort in that it's not a utility where it's like I'm altering the database. I'm just cleaning up my data here. So purchase orders, if they are fully received or otherwise dealt with, so quantities canceled, there's no quantities still hanging out there on the PO, then we would generally want to remove those to history. And again, I wish it didn't say remove completed POs. That sounds like you're deleting them. you're not, you're removing them from open to history. And so I lost that battle as well. And so anyway, it's just me. That's all right. I've come to live with it after almost 30 years, as most of you have too. So that's what I wanted to make sure we went through very quickly here. And I think Dawn, if she didn't fall asleep on us here from this
Yes,
gripping presentation, I think Dawn, you had maybe a question you wanted to just pop up here before we say goodbye.
I absolutely do. So one of the reasons that we have GP office hours is to make sure that you have the best experience with your software solution, the solution that you've invested in and have proficiency on. And we offer a bunch of services to help you get the most out of your system. One is upgrading your system. Another is conducting a business process review. Um, if you're not a customer of LBMC Technology Solutions, but you've been attending our GP office hours, first of all, welcome. Secondly, if you'd like to become a client of LBMC Technology Solutions, um, we'd love to talk to you about that. So on this poll question, which I hope everybody can see, we've given you those options. So if you'd like to learn more about upgrading to a supported level of GP, please click there. If you would like to get more information about conducting a business process review, please let us know. Um, I mentioned change of partners. And then also, we're here to support you on GP for the long term. But a lot of companies are beginning to plot their strategically look ahead to when they're going to move to the cloud. And we'd love to talk to you about that as well. We offer two cloud-based solutions. We offer Microsoft's D365 Business Central. We also offer Sage Intacct, but we also have a lot of exposure to other cloud software. So if we'd love to just have that initial conversation with you, share what we know, talk about your next steps. So if you'd like to engage in that, please click that button and let us know. So I'll leave this up for a moment or two, and then I'm going to end the poll. Thank you, everyone.
All right, and thank you all. Thank you, Dawn, for helping us out here, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Let us know if you have any questions. Happy to dig into it deeper if need be. So appreciate everyone's time.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, audience. We hope to see you next month at our June office hours. Have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Bye.